Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day to day lives. Let's start with the video.
I was always close to my family, especially my younger sister. We did everything together from playing with dolls as kids to shopping as adults. I never thought anything could come between us, but everything changed in an instant when my sister framed me for theft. I was accused of stealing from our parents' safe, and my sister was the only witness. She had always been a bit of a troublemaker, but I never thought she would go this far. At first, I thought it was just a misunderstanding. I tried to explain to my parents that I didn't steal anything, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced that I was lying and that my sister was telling the truth. It was like a switch had flipped. My parents went from being loving and supportive to being cold and distant. They stopped calling me and wouldn't answer my calls. My sister, who I thought was my best friend, wouldn't even look at me. For 2 years, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I couldn't understand why my family would believe such a horrible lie. I was angry and hurt, and I didn't know how to move on. I tried to reach out to them, but they wouldn't respond. It was like I had been erased from their lives. During those 2 years, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I felt like I had lost everything that mattered to me. My family was my rock. Now they were gone. It was like a part of me had died. I tried to keep myself busy to distract myself from the pain. I threw myself into my work, took up new hobbies, and even started dating again. But nothing could fill the void that my family had left. Eventually, I had to accept that they weren't coming back, that they had chosen to believe my sister over me, and that there was nothing I could do to change that. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I knew I had to move on with my life. Then, 4 years after the theft, my sister called me out of the blue. I was surprised and hesitant to pick up the phone, but I did. She sounded nervous and hesitant, and I could sense that something was off. That's when she confessed to framing me for the theft. She admitted that she had stolen the money from the safe and she had lied to our parents about it. She said that she was jealous of me and that she wanted to see me suffer. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that my sister had done something so cruel and hurtful. But at the same time, I felt some relief because finally the truth was out and I could clear my name. After the initial shock wore off, I asked my sister why she had waited so long to confess. She said that she had been living with the guilt and shame for years and that she couldn't bear to face me. But finally, she had reached a breaking point and needed to come clean. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was so angry, hurt, and betrayed that I didn't know what to do. All the emotions that I had bottled up inside of me for years came pouring out like a raging river. I was outraged by my sister's actions, and I screamed at her for being such a pathetic excuse for a sister. I told her that she had destroyed our family and that I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for what she had done. I reminded her of all the pain and suffering that I had gone through because of her lie. I told her about how I had lost my family, my friends, and my reputation because of her selfishness and jealousy. She tried to apologize and explain herself, but I wasn't having it. I was so hurt and angry that I didn't want to listen to her excuses. At that moment, I felt like my world was falling apart. I had spent so long trying to move on and build a new life for myself, but now everything felt like it was back at square one. I hung up the phone on my sister. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. All the emotions that I had worked so hard to suppress came rushing back with a vengeance. I was so overwhelmed with anger and hurt that I couldn't even see straight. I told my sister that I never wanted to speak to her again and that I hoped she would spend the rest of her life feeling the same kind of loneliness and despair that I had felt. But my sister's confession was just the beginning. Soon after, my parents called me and told me that they had just learned the truth about the theft. They told me that they were sorry for what had happened and that they wanted to make things right. At first, I was hesitant to speak with them. I couldn't believe that after all these years they were just now realizing that I was telling the truth. But eventually, I agreed to meet with them. When we sat down to talk, my parents tried to explain to me that my sister was just being childish and that I needed to forgive her. They told me that family was the most important thing and that I shouldn't let this come between us. But I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they expect me to just forgive and forget after all that I had gone through? How could they expect me to just brush aside the fact that my sister had framed me for a crime I didn't commit? I had a breakdown. I screamed and yelled at my parents, telling them that they had let me down and that they had chosen my sister over me for years. I told them that they had no right to tell me how to feel or how to deal with the pain that I had suffered. But despite all my anger and hurt, my parents still couldn't understand why I couldn't just forgive my sister. They kept telling me that family was everything and that I needed to move on. I took a deep breath and asked my parents where forgiveness and love were when I was framed and cut off from the family. I asked if they ever tried to give me a chance to tell my side of the story. My parents had blank expressions on their faces as if they didn't know how to respond. My mother spoke first and said that they didn't know what to believe and that my sister seemed so sure that I was guilty. Anger rose within me as I thought about it. I couldn't believe that they cut me off and believed the worst in me. I asked incredulously if that was enough for them to do so. My father tried to interject by saying that they were just trying to do what they thought was best. I cut him off by saying that what they thought was best was to abandon me and side with the person who framed me for a crime I didn't commit. I question how they could even suggest that forgiveness was the answer now. Even though my parents were taken aback by my outburst, I didn't care. I had been holding in my anger and hurt for too long. I couldn't believe that after all these years, they still couldn't see how much pain their actions had caused me. Firmly, I said that I didn't need their forgiveness or approval. I had been building a life for myself without their help or support, and I would continue to do so. I suggested that it was best if we went our separate ways if they couldn't understand why I couldn't just forgive and forget. Right then, I realized that I didn't need their approval or their acceptance anymore. I didn't need to try and convince them of the pain that I had suffered or the injustice that had been done to me. Update 1. Over the last few days, my family has tried to contact me, but I have ignored their calls and messages. I needed time to process everything that had happened. The other day, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw my entire family standing on my doorstep. I was surprised to see them all there and wondered what they would want. They asked me what they needed to do to make things right and rebuild our relationship. Specifically, they asked what they needed to do about my sister. Without hesitation, I told them that if they wanted to rebuild their relationship with me, they would have to cut off my sister for the next 4 years. This was the only valid punishment for what she had done to me. As I made my demand, I could see the shock and horror on my parents' faces. They were taken aback by my ultimatum. My mother's eyes filled with tears and my father's face turned red with anger. I told them that if they couldn't do it, then they could leave immediately. I knew that it was a harsh demand, but she needed to know that there were consequences for her actions. I wanted revenge, and if they didn't agree, then I would just go about living my life as I did for the past 4 years, without them. My sister, on the other hand, started screaming and crying, completely distressed by my words. I could see the guilt and fear in her eyes, but I refused to let it affect me. She deserved to feel the consequences of her actions. My parents begged me to let it go, to forgive and move on, but I stood firm. I knew that I couldn't just brush this under the rug and pretend as if nothing had happened. My sister had caused me so much pain and trauma, and she needed to face the consequences. As my parents continued to plead with me, I knew that I had to stand my ground. I told them that I would let them go instead and they could cherish their little thief. I didn't want to be mean, but I needed them to understand that I wouldn't tolerate this kind of betrayal. As I stood my ground, my siblings finally spoke up and agreed to cut off my sister. I could see the shock and horror on my parents' faces as they heard my siblings' words. It was clear that they never expected anyone to go against my sister. Despite my parents' disapproval, my siblings knew that it was the right thing to do. They understood how much pain my sister's actions had caused me, and they were willing to make amends. It wasn't an easy decision for them, but they knew that it was necessary to repair our family relationships. I watched my siblings and parents come to terms with this new reality. I knew it would be a rocky start, but it was a start to build back our relationships. As for her, she was bawling her eyes out in the corner just like I had when she had framed me for theft. NTA. OP's demand was savage, but valid. Kudos to her siblings for siding with her. NTA. It was harsh. But the closer you are, the harder the betrayal and pain are. The consequences are fair. Next story. I, 26, female, struggle with generalized anxiety disorder. I'm in therapy and on meds, but it gets bad sometimes. For this reason, I never learnt to drive. I tried, but I could never feel comfortable. I need to add that I've been in two very bad motor vehicle accidents. One time my friend fell asleep behind the wheel, and another time a truck pushed us off the road. The eldest brother also lost his life on the road. I am very jumpy when I'm in the passenger seat and sometimes need to take my meds, especially when driving long distance and at night. My boyfriend moved in with me recently, and a lot of times he'll take me places, but I also use Uber. I can't afford it. And mostly everything is within walking distance anyways. We used to be in an LDR. He lived 5 hours away from me, and I always took the bus or train. His mother would occasionally make an off comment on how much of an inconvenience it is that I don't have a license, and that she couldn't imagine not driving herself places. I shrugged it off, but it only got worse once he moved in with me. She'd imply that I'm only using him. I make a point to pay for half of his fuel expenses, so I'm not exactly charity. My boyfriend knows of my diagnosis and history, and I always thought that he understood. But he's also pushing me now. He kept insisting that he'll teach me how to drive because it's weird that an almost 27-year-old woman can't drive herself. The other day, we were on our way to visit his sister. He stopped the car and told me that I should drive the rest of the way. It was only about 10 kilometers, but I refused and he insisted. He said he'll teach me and I need to overcome my fear. I started freaking out and honestly lost myself a bit. I cried so much and started hyperventilating that I had to take my emergency meds. He still believes it's weird and that I'm not independent. His words are spinning in my head, and I'm starting to wonder if it's even normal considering my age. AITA? NTA, I've said it before and I'll say it again. People who are not comfortable driving should not be driving because they make the roads more dangerous for everyone. The decision you have made is the responsible and mature decision. Your boyfriend is immature for being hung up on it, and he is responsible for his mother's AH-ish assumption that you are using him. Even if he doesn't like the fact that you don't drive, he has an obligation to set his mother straight and explain that you are not using him, and she should cut out offensive comments like that. If you want some advice, I would encourage you to be straightforward with him. I am not a driver. I am not going to be a driver. Whether you are willing to accept it or not, I have a medical reason why me being a driver is an incredibly dangerous idea. Frankly, even if I didn't have a medical reason and just didn't want to be a driver, your behavior would be unacceptable. But it's simply appalling for you to treat me this way given my diagnosis and history. So this topic is now closed permanently. Personally, his behavior is enough of a deal breaker for me that I would add, if you ever attempt to pressure me to drive again, I'm getting out of the car and going directly home, possibly to pack your things. NTA. First of all, you have related trauma, and it's not weird not to know how to drive. But more importantly, they can't decide what's best for you, pester you, and ambush you. It's your choice when and if. Next story. My sister Missy, 16, is actually my older sister's sister. My older sister and I share the same mother. I am the product of an affair. My stepdad raised me and maintained the relationship after he divorced my mother. My stepfather passed away almost a year ago. I was supporting his household. Mrs. Mother hates me and has always thrown in my face, "You are not my child's sister." I continued to support the household, including her oldest son, 24. When my stepfather passed, I tried to maintain contact and help as much as I could. After the funeral, they cut ties with me. I would try to call Missy and it would go to voicemail. I maintained the contract on the phone and paid for the service. I did notice the phone was still being used, but I just figured her mother didn't want her talking to me. Missy reached out this week asking if I would help them move because the mother's boyfriend is acting crazy. I offered her a place to stay and she stated, "We just need money to move or one of your rentals. My mom hates you." I asked her if that is why she didn't reach out until now, and she said, "My text and calling do not always work." I said my offer to stay with me is on the table, but I cannot give more money. Mrs. Mother called me saying I'm trying to steal her daughter and I should want to help them. I offered her a job with managing my rentals, but she said she would never work for me. I ended the call and went for a run. I came back to floods of calls and texts from my family asking why I'm refusing to help my sister, saying, "You won't allow your gay sister in your home?" Saying I'm an a-hole and want to see them homeless. I didn't know my sister was gay, nor would I have ever cared. I sent my sister a message saying, "I cannot help you or your mother. I will maintain your phone until you're 18, but you will either have to pay for it yourself or pay me. I love you for who you are, no matter what, but please never contact me again." My older sister said I'm being an a-hole because I am bitter Missy won't come live with me. Reality is, I actually never wanted her to live with me. I just really do not want to support her mother and brother and whoever else anymore. AITA? Edit. Here are some questions I will gladly answer. Mrs. Mother has hated me since I was about 16-ish. I was not welcome at the wedding because she felt I would set a bad example for the future. I am assuming this was related to my mother's affair. She has called me every name under the sun, and I let it go until I was 24. I snapped, and I did say some unsavory shit, but I have apologized. She has maintained that attitude, "You are a whore and I hate you." These are her words. My stepfather did leave her and took Missy with him. When he got sick, she moved back in. My older sister refused to help him when he could no longer work. I stepped in. I loved him and Missy. The mother invited her son into the home to help. My biological father wasn't the greatest, but he left me a hefty trust. This provided the house Missy and her family lived in until my father died. Her mother decided to move back to Florida and asked me to sell the house and give Missy half. The day I said no, contact stopped. My oldest sister spends a lot of time with Missy, but will not give her a single penny. She will buy her an outfit here or there. I called CPS to do a welfare check. They said they would investigate. My oldest sister has doubled down on me being an a-hole. I ended the call by asking her to move out of my rental or start paying rent as well. You are all right. I have allowed some of the most toxic people into my life. None of these people is my family, including my older sister. I have changed my number this morning. I spoke with my mother and I explained to her she gives my number to any of them and she will be cut off as well. Thank you all. NTA, you are under no obligation to people that treat you poorly. If you hate me, then don't ask me for anything. There is nothing worse than people that only call you when they need something. No one should indulge that behavior. Cut the phone off. If you can't give me the courtesy to see how I am or respond to my texts or calls, then pay for it yourself. As for all the people trying to manipulate you into helping, ask them how much they plan to give. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.